Hello there, lovely folks of YouTube. Ren here. This is kind of an awkward time of year in the garden. There's not a lot of things that are growing. There's not a lot of tasks that need to be done other than just general cleaning up and weeding and maintenance. But there is one thing that I do tend to do around this time of year that really can only happen at this time of year, and that is gathering seed. So most of the plants in my garden are originally started from seed. It's very hard to find seeds for a lot of the stranger plants that typically have like more occult uses. They're not commonly grown. So things like your mugwort, like you're not going to find mugwort in a nursery because it's generally considered to be a weed. If you want that plant, sometimes you can find it from some specialty people, but generally you have to grow it from seed. Sometimes even the seeds can be hard to find. There are a couple of retail locations that you can buy seed from, and of course I will give links to the two places that I'm going to mention here. So one is from Harold Roth. His website Alchemy Works has been selling seeds for plants for numerous years. He also has an amazing book, The Witching Herbs, that he published a couple years ago, which I highly recommend. I will do a review of that book once I get it back from the friend who I lent it to, but because I want to reread it before I talk about it. But it's really good. I'm really looking forward to rereading it, even though I've read it once before. It's my favorite book. But he has a website, Alchemy Works. He does sell seeds for a lot of witchy plants. All of the seeds that he sells are things that he grew in his own garden, so that's really cool. However, of course, because he's limited in the size of his garden, much like I am, he has a limited number of things that he sells. There's another source that I use for things that he doesn't carry, which is called J.L. Hudson, and it is a public access seed bank that's based in California, and they have numerous plants, and they sell anything that they have, basically. If they have enough on hand that they can sell it, they will sell it. And you can sometimes find a lot of weirder plants there as well. So obviously I'll give those two links. But when I can, I try to get my own seed or source my own seed just from what I have around me. All the plants that I have in my garden, even the ones that are perennial, I will sometimes harvest seed from so that I can share that seed with others. Like for example, my rue plant has seeds right now. My marshmallow, which is looking very sparse behind me over here, has some seeds on it that I can gather. But I've actually found that one of my best sources for seed is actually just from looking around me and gathering things from the wild, from things that just happen to be in my area. Because for one thing, I know that they grow in my area if they're already growing in my area, so it makes it a lot easier. And also, of course, it's free. And you also get a lot more genetic diversity then, because there tend to be hardier plants, a little on the wilder side, but they've been out there. They've been out on the mean streets of the wild, basically, and they tend to be a little bit tougher than some of the garden stock that you get. Now, big caveat with this. You want to make sure 100% that you know, deep down in your heart, you are absolutely certain you know what that plant is, okay? If you're iffy on it, be careful. Like, I wouldn't even mess with a plant unless I was 100% certain that I know what it is, because there's a lot of poisonous plants that can make you sick even just coming through a lot of contact with that plant. There's a lot of plants that can cause rashes if you come into contact with that plant inadvertently. Poison ivy, obviously, but even other plants like rue sometimes will cause a rash in certain people if they're sensitive to it. And then, of course, there's things that will just sting the shit out of you, like wild nettles. If you don't know how to recognize them and know how to handle them, then you're going to get burned, literally. So, it can be tough to identify a plant if you've never actually interacted with it before. I know that there are field guides and there are apps like the what's the name of that app? I think it's called Picture It, Picture This, something like that. It's helpful. It's a helpful tool, especially if you've never encountered a plant. But really the best way to actually know that you're dealing with a plant that you think you are is to learn hands-on from someone who already knows. And I know that's not always the easiest thing to do, but it really does make a big difference. I had that experience in my own personal life. Like, I grew up my whole life, you know, with the whole, like, leaves of three, let it be mantra, and, you know, seeing pictures of what poison ivy looked like in books and, you know, wildlife guides, because of course I did scouting for a long time. But it wasn't until I went on an actual Girl Scout retreat and had somebody else who was knowledgeable of the plants in the area. We were actually doing a tree walk, and she pointed out, she said, now be careful of that tree right there because you can see the poison ivy growing up the side. It's the first time that I actually had it pointed out to me by another person, and that was what made it stick in my brain. You can look at all the pictures you want, but it's the actual physical, like, interaction with the plant that seems to make it stick. And I think that's probably has something to do with how we're wired evolutionary way, you know, is basically learning to identify plants, is we really need to interact with those plants. So I know that was a bit rambly, but that's my caveat basically. Be careful with these plants. Try to find a way to identify them. If you can't get a personal guide, going to a botanical garden or some other garden where the plants are marked and you can basically say, oh, this is that plant, is helpful. It's not always 100% because sometimes the plant that's growing next to the marker isn't what is supposed to be there. So you have to be careful with that, and that's really why it helps to have somebody physically there. But you can always use an app if you don't have any of those resources. Just be very, very careful and make sure you're 100% certain before you start messing around with wild plants. So, but anyway, yeah. Once you have a plant that you found in the wild and you want to gather it from, personally, I only like to gather seed because that way I'm not harming the plant in any way, and I can bring the plant into my own garden and then build up that relationship with it before I harvest it. But it also kind of depends on, like, you have to build up a relationship with that plant in the wild too, at the very least coming back and interacting with it on a regular basis in order to learn more about that plant and when that plant seed is going to be ready. Because the seed is ready at different times for different plants. It's usually around this time of year generally for most plants, but each individual plant is going to have its own time that it sets seed, and then you're learning more about that particular plant partner. Some of the plants are really easy to gather seed from. One of the plants that I got seed from, not this year but last year, is Datura stromomium. Jimson weed is one of the common names, which is, it's a big, scraggly, it's very poisonous by the way, big, scraggly, rank smelling, considered to be a weed. Also super hallucinogenic. However, the what we call the therapeutic window on that is very narrow, meaning that it's super, super easy to overshoot hallucinogen and go straight into ICU hospitalization levels. So I don't recommend messing with that plant unless, of course, you just want to grow it and look at it, which is what I did basically. But yeah, that's a plant that's very easy to harvest the seed from because it makes these big, noticeable, spiny seed pods that split open, and then you can see the ripe seed inside. Very easy to gather seed from. Another one that I gathered this year, which was a little trickier, but still not terrible, I picked up some jewelweed seed. One of the common names on jewelweed is touch-me-not, because the seed pods, when the seed is ripe, the seed pods will explode. Literally explode and just send the seed shooting out at about 50 miles an hour. So a little bit trickier, but the way I did it is basically just very carefully kind of cup the pod in my hand and then touch it, and it would then explode in my hand and shoot the seeds into my hand. It doesn't hurt when it explodes, it's just, as long as it doesn't go in your eye, of course. But it's kind of like when you get those like biscuits that are packed in the cardboard tube and you pop the tube and it, yeah, it's the same principle basically, just pressurized. But so I picked some seeds from that, doing that, and then others, you know, you just have to kind of catch them at just the right time, just the right time. So one of the examples is this guy right here. I have him sitting here. This was in my front yard, popped up wild in my front yard. I was super excited about it. This is mullein, and lots of seeds in this little seed head. I've actually knocked out about an ounce worth of seeds from that, but you can see there's even more popping up that I'm kind of setting aside here. Some of those I'm just going to put in my garden right now. I've got about an ounce of seed that I've gathered from that I've saved, saving in my fridge. The seeds are best to save in your fridge. It stays cool and dry that way. Helps to preserve them so that they have a better chance of germination in the spring. But you definitely want to do your research and find out how to best grow that seed in your garden for yourself, because different seeds like different ways. Like these mullein seeds, you saw how teeny tiny they were. I would probably just surface sow them. I wouldn't bother to bury them because they're so small that if you bury them too deep, the plant will never have a chance to actually surface. Whereas the bigger seeds like the datura can be buried a little bit deeper. Different requirements for heat and cold. Some of them like cold stratifying, which means they need that period of cold, wet period, like as if they were going through a winter time before they'll germinate. So, but yeah, it's a really cool way to kind of deepen your relationship with the plants and learn more about the plant and its life cycle. And I think that just starting them from seed, of course, is really a great way to, you know, kind of start that relationship from scratch. I do have a video on seed starting that I did back in February, because in bulk is usually around the time that I do that. So, but yeah, anyway, I don't think I really have anything else to say on this. If you have any questions, of course, I'm more than happy to answer them. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you'd like to. You know, it's really cool to know that there are people who are actually interested enough in what I'm saying that they want to follow my channel, so that's always cool and appreciated. Thank you for getting me to 500 subscribers. That was awesome. It happened on my birthday, which was very serendipitous timing. But anyway, that's all. Hope this video finds you well, and I will see you again soon.